I'm Kaylee. Standing by the window of my apartment, I watch the sunlight drift through the empty house at Pinebrook Lane. It's a sight that once filled me with so many conflicting emotions, but now, it just represents a new beginning. That house, once bustling with the so-called family drama, is quiet. The silence that follows is not empty. It's earned. 2 weeks ago, a plain envelope showed up in my mailbox. It had my father, Henry's, handwriting on it. Inside was a half-filled loan form with my name typed as a co-signer and a letter. There was no apology, just a thinly veiled attempt at manipulation. For a moment, I stared at it, and then I let out a tired laugh. I took a photo and sent it to my grandpa, Oscar. "Guess they're still digging," I said. He replied, "Then we'll just build higher walls." The next day, he called his lawyer, and by evening, my credit was locked down and every account was protected. For the first time in months, I felt completely safe. But let me take you back to the events that led to this point. I'm a 32-year-old accountant. I have a decent apartment and a predictable daily routine. I deal with numbers all day long, but for years, the only numbers that truly mattered were the ones related to my family's well-being. My father, Henry, was a self-proclaimed businessman. However, no one could really figure out what kind of business he was involved in. He liked to take early retirement, claiming work-related stress, while I saw it as sheer laziness. My mother, Vera, was a dreamer. She quit her job as a librarian to pursue what she called spiritual enlightenment. Most days, she spent her time meditating, taking long walks, and complaining about the sudden appearance of bills. Then there was my older sister, Lily. She was the polar opposite of me. Loud, flamboyant, and always looking for the next big thing. She was an aspiring social media influencer, but her lack of discipline often got in the way. Whenever her sponsorships fell through or her rent was due, she'd call me in tears. And somehow, I'd always end up transferring money, telling myself it was just this once. But that once turned into a never-ending cycle. My grandpa, Oscar, was the only one in the family who saw through all of this. One day, while we were having coffee, he tilted his mug towards me and said, "You can't keep buying their peace, Kaylee. It's like renting a luxury apartment. The rent is going to bankrupt you." I just laughed, pretending not to understand, but deep down I knew he was right. He was the only one who never asked me for anything, which made me love him even more. One quiet Wednesday night, as I was folding laundry from the dryer, my phone lit up with a text from my father. "Don't contact us. Don't come around. You're on your own now." There was no warning, no explanation. Just this cold, harsh message. And then Lily liked the message, as if it was some kind of a joke. For a split second, I was stunned. But then, a strange sense of freedom washed over me. I typed back, "Great. I'll cancel the auto payments first thing tomorrow." By midnight, my phone was going crazy. Missed calls and texts were piling up. My mother was pleading, my father was demanding, and Lily was gaslighting. But I didn't reply. I poured myself a glass of water, turned off the dryer, and whispered, "This is what freedom feels like." The next morning, at 6 a.m., my phone rang. It was Grandpa Oscar. "Morning, kid," he said in his gravelly voice. "You okay?" I lied and said I was fine. He told me to bring a calm face because I'd need it. An hour later, I drove to his house. As I walked in, the smell of coffee filled the air. He was sitting at the table with 2 mugs, a plate of toast, and a thick folder. "You look tired," he said. I told him I stopped sleeping when I stopped paying. He nodded and pushed the folder towards me. "You need to see this." Inside the folder were papers, letters, and tax records. The address on them was Pinebrook Lane, the house where my parents lived, the house I grew up in. "I don't understand," I said. Grandpa replied, "They never owned it, Kaylee. It's mine, always has been. They told you they were renovating and just needed time, but 12 years is a long, temporary stay." I stared at the papers in disbelief. My parents had not only been living rent-free, but had also taken my kindness for granted. Grandpa then said, "I gave them 60 days to leave." Asked if Dad knew, and he said no, but he would. I was worried they'd blame me, but Grandpa said, "This isn't about punishment. It's about the truth catching up with them." 2 days later, Lily sent a voice note in a fit of rage, accusing me of ruining everything. I didn't respond. I'd learned that silence was more powerful than anger. That morning, Grandpa called to say that they'd received the notice and were already trying to spin the story. Dad called him cruel, and Mom couldn't believe he'd do this to the family. That night, I went to Grandpa's again. He was sealing 3 envelopes. He said they were certified copies of the notice. "Paper doesn't lie, Kaylee. It stands firm when people cry," he said. I sat down, worried that they'd hate me, but Grandpa said, "They already do, not because you hurt them, but because you stopped being their cash cow." And at that moment, something inside me broke free. A sense of relief washed over me. When I got home, I sat down at my laptop and started canceling all the auto payments, utility bills, property taxes, and even Lily's streaming service subscription. With each click, I felt lighter. The next morning, a storm of texts came in. My father said, "How could you do this to your own parents?" My mother said, "We raised you better." And Lily declared, "You're dead to me." I read them all over my morning coffee and whispered, "Good. Let the old version of me die." Grandpa called later to warn me they'd fight, but I told him, "I'm done renting peace." He was proud of me and said, "That's my girl." That night, I slept soundly without checking my phone. When Saturday came, Lily turned the family situation into social media content. She posted a screenshot of our old house, a crying selfie, and a caption full of victimhood. "We're being thrown out of our own home. Sometimes family turns into strangers. Pray for us." In just 4 hours, her post went viral. Hundreds of comments poured in, accusing me of being a monster. But then, things started to change. Aunt Grace called, her voice trembling. "Honey, what's going on? Your mom says they're being evicted." I calmly explained that the house was Grandpa's, and they'd been living there rent-free for 12 years. There was a long silence on the other end, followed by a soft "oh." By Sunday afternoon, Grandpa sent an email to the whole family. He explained the situation in detail, including how my parents hadn't paid utilities or upkeep for over a decade, and how I'd been covering the costs from my own income for the last 4 years. The email hit like a bomb. People started to see the truth. Lily's comment section began to shrink, and her posts lost their power. However, Mom didn't give up. She went to the church and, during the prayer requests, stood up and pleaded, "Please pray for us. Our children have turned against us. We're losing our home." The rumor mill started spinning again. But then a high school acquaintance, Ethan, messaged me. He said he'd stayed at my parents' place through Airbnb last year and recognized the kitchen from Lily's posts. I called Grandpa right away, and he told me to go get the guest book. When I went to the house at Pinebrook Lane, Lily opened the door. Her makeup was smudged, and her voice was sharp. "What are you doing here?" I said I left something in the basement. Inside, the house smelled like cheap air freshener, and there were corny, welcome signs everywhere. It was clear they'd turned Grandpa's house into a vacation rental. In the basement, I found the guest book. It was full of names, dates, and payment references. I took photos of everything, my hands shaking but my mind clear. When I went back upstairs, Mom was standing at the top of the stairs, pale and furious. "What are you doing here?" I simply said, "Leaving," and walked past her. That night, I showed the photos to Grandpa. He was furious. "They turned my house into a motel and still played the victim," he said. The next morning, he called his lawyer, and within 2 days, a court order reduced their notice from 60 days to 14 due to unauthorized subletting. But my parents and sister still didn't stop. Mom called relatives saying Grandpa was senile, Dad told neighbors I'd forged papers, and Lily went live on social media, acting like a victim. Grandpa invited some of his old friends, including a retired attorney, to his house. He gave them all a folder with property deeds, guest book entries, and a doctor's statement proving his mental clarity. He simply said, "This is what's real." After that, Lily's posts disappeared. 14 days later, they moved out. I drove by the house. The porch looked smaller without their chaos, and there was a single key glinting in the sunlight under the steps. Grandpa called that night and said the house was empty. He told me I'd done the right thing. And as I looked out at the city lights, I felt a weight lift off my chest. The long-awaited justice had finally arrived. Now I stand here, looking at the empty house at Pinebrook Lane, and I know that the peace I've found is worth every bit of the struggle. I've learned that sometimes you have to cut ties with the people who are supposed to love you to find your own true self. If you've ever been in a similar situation, know that you're not alone. Hit like, share your story in the comments, and subscribe for more.